Welcome to Faith Fire. It's a podcast by MyFaithNews. My name is Pastor Leo, and this is a new space that we're beginning in 2026. It's an honest conversation about faith and how God forms in our lives, and the quiet places where God meets us. Today, we're going to begin a new series called Learning to Ride. I pray that you find it helpful and that it's something that you can utilize in your own life. These are reflections. They aren't sermons, they're invitations. And today's question is a simple one, but it carries more weight than we realize. When did life start feeling like it was all up to you? Most people can't tell you when it even happened. They just know it did. At some point, life stops feeling shared and starts feeling heavy. Decisions carried more weight. Mistakes, they felt final. Asking for help, that was definitely felt like weakness. Faith, if it was still there, felt quieter, more like pressure than presence. You didn't wake up one morning and decide, I'll carry everything myself. It happened subtly, gradually, respectably, and somehow, without anyone saying it out loud, responsibility replaced trust. So let's frame the question. This is the question we're going to start with. When did life start feeling like it was all up to you? There was a lie that we call growing up. It says, you should have we should have figured this out by now. Strong people don't need help. If everything fails, it's because you didn't try hard enough. And the last one, God helps those who help themselves. That last one isn't even in scripture, but it feels biblical enough so that no one questions it. The result, we learn to manage life instead of receive it. We learn to perform faith instead of resting in it. We learn to carry outcomes instead of carrying presence. And slowly, quietly, we stop living as sons and daughters, and we start living as managers. I call that Cain's world. The book of Genesis gives us language for this tension. Long before modern psychology ever tried, Cain brings an offering, so does Abel. No one tells them, there's no rule given, there's no law enforced. Offering flows naturally. It's part of our nature, not obligation. But Cain's offering carries something extra: expectation, calculation, and comparison. Cain brings what he worked for, and Abel brings what he received. If you remember, Cain was a tiller of the soil. And if also remember, it was cursed during with his father, that the ground will be cursed for his sake. And Cain was working that same ground. But Abel, he worked from breath. He raised animals. And these are things that he received. He didn't have to work as hard as Cain did. And so when God responds, he doesn't correct Cain's effort. He addresses Cain's orientation. Why are you wroth? Why is your countenance fallen? God speaks to Cain, not Abel. Why? Because Abel is at rest. Cain is under pressure. Cain lives in a world where results validate your self-worth. And Abel lives in a world where relationship precedes action. One lives as if everything depends on him, and the other lives as if everything flows through him. This is where many people quietly lose joy in their life. Faith becomes another responsibility, another thing to maintain, another place where failure feels personal. Prayer turns into reporting. Scripture turns into instructions. And obedience turns into anxiety. Not because God changed, but because our posture changed. Jesus names this clearly. He says, "Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden light." If the burden is crushing, something is misaligned. Jesus never invited us into pressure. He invited us into preparation. For many of us, the shift happens here. When provision becomes uncertain, when leadership disappoints us, when silence lasts longer than comfort, when we had to step up before we were ever ready, we told ourselves, someone has to hold this together. And we did. But there's the quiet cost. We learned to survive without sensing. We learned to lead without listening, and we learn to function without that fragrance that pleases God from our lives. The inner life dried up, not because we stopped believing, but because belief replaced belonging. Jesus never lived as if everything was up to him, even though everything passed through him. He withdrew often. He waited, he listened, he trusted timing. The Son can do nothing of himself, but that which he seeth the Father do. That sentence destroys the myth of spiritual self-reliance. Jesus didn't hustle obedience. He saw, then he acted, presence first, action second. And you know what that's called? That's called wholeness. When Jesus heals, he didn't say, your efforts worked. Your discipline paid off. Your theology, it was correct. He says instead, thy faith has made thee whole. And isn't it funny? That was the offering that Abel made. Abel made an offering by faith. It's when the inner and the outer stop fighting, when Cain stops trying to lead and Abel is allowed to breathe. Wholeness feels lighter, not because life is easy, but because you're no longer alone inside of it. This podcast isn't asking you to do less. It's asking you to stop doing alone, to notice where pressure replaces presence, where responsibility is replaced by trust, where faith becomes heavy, and gently ask, what if this was never all up to me? The most dangerous moment isn't failure. It's when you become competent enough to survive without God. But the invitation still stands, not to abandon responsibility, but to reorder it. Abel doesn't disappear. Cain doesn't die. Cain learns to survive. Abel learns to lead. And life becomes shared because it's not perfect. It's not easy, but you find wholeness in your life. This is Faith Fire by MyFaithNews. Thank you for joining us and listening. If you have a comment or question, please send them in. My hope is that in 2026, that this series that we do will be helpful to our walk as we learn to walk in wholeness and in completeness as God has called us to. Have a blessed day.